Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody online for joining. Thanks, everybody here, of course. And thanks first and foremost to Teri Pope, to Teresa Pope, for joining us from the California State Parks. She is the District Interpretive Chief of Inland Southern California. And we've already been talking a little bit. Some of you joined a little bit early, so we've been already getting into this. I'm going to be sharing some websites. You can also call an audible and shout out a website you'd like me to share with the group in the chat. And then also when I share the recording afterwards, I might have a nice long list of websites and resources that you recommend now, or if you think of something later, I can throw that along with the recording when we share the recording out to the group. So thanks everybody for joining. Please join me in giving a virtual welcome to Teri Pope from the California State Parks.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. You want me to go ahead and get started? Yes. Okay. Well, I'll give you just a really brief look at my background. I had the chance in midlife to kind of restart my life because someone else had a crisis, as happens so often. So I had a long history in historic reenactment and come from a family of history buffs. So I decided to pursue a state parks career, or at that point it was a museum or parks career. Went to graduate school as a public history major up at CSU Sacramento, or Sac State as we call it locally. And my undergrad work many years before that was in theater. So I like to jokingly say, because I don't think any degree is useless, but I jokingly say I'm the poster child for having two useless degrees and cobbling them into a whole career. Because people always go, oh, theater, oh, history, oh, you can't make a living at that. Well, yes, you can. So I started my park career as a graduate assistant at the photographic archives that State Parks manages. We have a lot of museum and cultural resources items that State Parks holds. The photographic archives is obviously, it is a picture, it is an archive of photographs. So started out as a graduate assistant as a cataloger, and then I started working as a seasonal, which we have seasonal employees and permanent employees. I'm going to kind of give you the briefing on State Parks employment as we go. Seasonal employees don't need to take an exam. They're used for a maximum of either 1,500 hours a year or 189 days. Usually it's days now, used to be hours. And started with Sutter's Fort as a living history interpreter there for their summer program. Eventually got picked up by the California State Capitol because State Parks runs the historic functions of that building. I was a tour guide there for 4 years. And then I promoted into an Interpreter 1 position, which is a permanent position, and a Guide 1, which is what I was at the State Capitol. That's also a permanent position. Promoted into an Interpreter 1 on Angel Island State Park, which is in the San Francisco Bay. It's the bigger, prettier island, and we have topsoil, as I like to say. Although the two islands in the bay work very closely together. Even though we're two different park systems, Alcatraz is national parks, Angel Island is state parks, we all know each other. We work together on projects. We work very much aligned. And I was there for 10 years running living history programs for kids. We had an overnight Civil War program where the kids came in and stayed at the part of the island that was a Civil War Union Army camp. And then I promoted to an Interpreter 2 down here at Silverwood Lake. In fact, I was looking at my Facebook memories and it was like next week, right before the world shut down, that I came down for my interview. And then back in August, I promoted to an Interpreter 3, which is the supervisory role in interpretation. And I oversee the interpreters and interpretive programs throughout the Inland Empire District, which encompasses 6 parks, two park properties. And we have a regional Indian museum. We have 3 SRAs, which are state recreation areas, a state historic park, which is Citrus State Historic Park, and a couple state parks. And we have everything from caverns to tramways up the side of Mount San Jacinto. So that's the brief background of my history with parks. I've been there about, well, if I include my grad assistant time, I've been with parks about 23 years. So I still want to see a couple projects through. So I'm planning on about 3 more years. So that's the short version. Interpreters like to talk a lot, and trust me, that's the short version.
This is great. Well, this is a great way to start. And you told me a couple of sites to start off with. I share the Silverwood Lake site, and I've got a few more that I'm going to share with everybody online. But this is the California state recreation area you're talking about here. I won't share screen because that kind of jerks everybody around a little bit online, and you don't necessarily need to do that, but you can click through yourself.
Don't go up there right now. It's closed because all the roads up to the mountains are closed, and yeah, so it'll open in hopefully a week or so again, whenever they can get the road open. But yeah.
This is great. Well, you said grad assistant, so you did go for your MA.
I did go for my MA. I did not. All I had left to do. I'm all but thesis. I did all the classwork. Did not do the thesis because I was kind of struggling single parent, and when someone said, "Hey, here's a permanent position," I sort of jumped on it. So sometimes I regret that, but sometimes I'm like, well. Yeah, it's not the best thing. I don't recommend it. Finish your degree if you can, but if you can't, it's not like a death knell. So
well, it's a good point, because we had thought in our particular MA program, and this is going to get into the minutia of our MA program, but not everybody here is in the MA program. So if you're not, hey, this is our plug for the MA program. We do offer a portfolio and a project option along with that thesis. So I think that is, and we have a few students who have taken that option, and I think that flexibility is really important.
It is. And when because I was planning to do my thesis project, but it was working with some of the foothill cemeteries to develop a walking tour program, and I couldn't get any traction with them, and it was like, you know what, job in the hand. So I went with the job in the hand, so yeah.
Well, last week, rather, we heard from Nathan Gonzalez, who's over at the Smiley Library in Redlands, and also worked in archives. And it's so funny that you mentioned theater. So I just want to touch on that myself, because I remember as an undergrad really enjoying the theater department and almost running in that direction. And the importance of what you picked up in the theater department, because Nathan Gonzalez talked about the importance of the connections between what he learned there in terms of set design, and in terms of theater as a sort of presentation, as a kind of reenactment. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, bringing different skills to your work.
Sure. We sometimes refer to interpreters as the storytellers of parks. I call them the message makers of parks. I also call us creative disruptors, and I was using that term long before Glass Onion came out. So I'm going to own that. So it matches theater that way. There's a lot of storytelling. Theater is storytelling, but just the individual aspects of theater, like aside from just the public speaking and presentation, when you're designing an exhibit, you're looking at set design and lighting design. We did up here at Silverwood, one of the first things I did was they had an exhibit to install for the nature center that had been built like 10 years before and never been opened really with any exhibits. So they were bringing that in. And the set designer and I were focusing lights, that's part of theater tech. Every time I do a special event, there's a lot of directing and stage managing that goes into that. Now in my current position where I'm kind of managing, it's not quite the 10,000 foot level. It's more like the 5,000 foot level. But there's a lot of stage management and planning in that. So there's a lot of aspects of theater, not just the presentation, not just the public speaking. I have taught voice classes for interpreters because they can be talking all day. Those Hearst Castle guides are talking all day. When I was at the Capitol, I did some voice classes for our interpreters or our guides to teach them how to keep their voice safe so that they don't burn it out. So there's a lot of aspects of theater, and it helps in just some ways. You're like, okay, how am I going to tell this story? Well, I want to start here. I want to get to here. Thematic interpretation is the trend, and it is more than a trend. It's what we do. It's been around for well, since Freeman Tilden, who wrote his kind of the Interpreting Our Heritage is the book. It's a small book. It's only about that thick. And it kind of is the granddaddy of interpretive reading, and he was writing that in the 1930s. So
Can you tell me the title of that?
Interpreting Our Heritage.
Interpreting Our Heritage.
By Freeman Tilden, and it's like constantly in print.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to send. I'll find a link.
Oh yeah.
In case people want to grab that text as a sort of. Sounds like a classic text for them.
It is that, and I can send you a couple more that are kind of anything by Sam Ham.
2 M's.
1 M.
1 M.
Yep. And anything, there's co-writers Beck and Cable.
Okay.
And if you look any of those up, and don't ask me the titles of those, are all on my shelf, but
I assume this is what you guys get if you take classes with, because it's a little outside of my realm of Chinese history. But if you take classes with Professor Long or Professor Lorimer or Professor Ocampo, Robinson, Johnson on this type of history, I'm sure a lot of you guys are very familiar with this text.
yeah. And like I said, those are kind of the foundational texts of interpretation. We'll tell you how to build a story on a theme, which is thematic interpretation, and then tell it so that we're always searching for relevance. That's our big keyword. We're searching for relevance because I always believe that your audience should be able to go, well, so what? Well, here's why this is important to you. You know, this is the link between those people 400 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, last week, and you. Here's why it's important. So
you mentioned that earlier, and this is something that we all work with and struggle with in any kind of history, really in any kind of academic, seriously, inquiry, really. And so I'm going to share a couple links in just a second because Teri had mentioned this before we got started. And here are just a few examples of the Relevancy and History project. So I'm going to go ahead and send that through in the chat and also share with the recording after the fact. But that I think is a really, really neat thing for us all to be tuned into. So as we continue in just a minute, I'll copy and paste those all into the chat there. But you had also mentioned just in a while we're still sort of in nuts and bolts mode, you had mentioned promotions sort of through the ranks, and it sounds like that's something that's a very appealing aspect of the field itself. The field of California State Park interpreter is that there is a sort of roadmap of going through a series of promotions. And
there is. A lot of folks start out as seasonals, almost everybody going into not just state parks, but national parks, county parks, museums, they will start out as seasonals. Some also start out as volunteers and become seasonals. And like I said, seasonal, you don't have to take the exam. Permanent positions, for just about anybody, any government entity, you're going to have to take exams, or sometimes we call them assessments now, to get on the hiring list, which is where you will find out about, hey, there's an interpreter position out here, and there's one out here, and that's where you can send in your application, but you have to be on the hiring list. But seasonals don't have to be on the hiring list. The downside of being a seasonal is the pay is horrendously bad. And we keep trying to pressure them to, up that pay because it's in the $16 to $19 range right there an hour, so you're gonna, and if you're doing a 40-hour week, you're gonna have a couple months off because of the 189-day limit. So, somehow some parks do offer housing for, like, on Angel Island. When I was there, we had the permanents basically all lived there, but the seasonals, we had a dorm. It was because that was a military site for a lot of its history. It was a 1912 officers' quarters building, 3 stories. And we could rent it to them for $50 a month. And the reason why they pay a rent on it is not because State Parks carries a mortgage on it, but because if you don't, then it's a taxable benefit. And this was right outside of Tiburon, California, which is a very, very wealthy North Bay town, and we'd be paying Tiburon or taxes on Tiburon rents. So by paying, and it's negotiated with the unions, by paying that rent, you avoid that. So sometimes some parks can offer housing to seasonals, not a lot of them. Some parks offer housing to permanents, not everyone. That's not a given. So it'll say in the job ad, it'll say housing is not available, or housing is available, or a trailer pad is available, but you have to bring your own trailer. So there is a progression. Most, like I said, start as seasonals. And then a lot of people start as either guides, which the state capitol uses guides. Hearst Castle uses a lot of guides. That's where the bulk of guides are across the state. And then they can either move up into, that's a guide 1 position. They can either move up into guide 2, which is more supervisory. They don't get to do a lot of interpretation. Or they can move up into the interpreter class, which is 1, 2, and 3. And then you're sort of classed out. And not, there's a lot fewer. Most of the people that are interpreter 3s are the district interpretive coordinator, the district interpretive chief, like me. Blythe is not a district interpretive chief, but she runs the whole relevancy and history program for state parks. So she's based down here. She works remote, but she's to all the districts, which right now is 4. And luckily 3 of them are not too far: San Diego, Inland Empire, the Bay Area district, and then Channel Coast district, which is like Ventura, San Luis, not San Luis Obispo, Ventura and Santa Barbara area. So those are the history and relevancy parks. But yeah, there is a progression. And not everybody wants to go up the progression. I thought I was going to stay in interpreter 1 because I really like doing frontline stuff, didn't want to be in an office. And then we have a really good district superintendent in this district who just will kind of, without you knowing, I tease her, this was part of her nefarious plan, that she kind of would go, "Hey, Teri, can you handle this? Hey, can you take care of this?" So she kind of taught me I could do the job. And when it opened up, I was ready to take a look at that might not be so bad. So that's how I got where I am. But yeah, there is a progression.
I want to open it up to anybody who has questions either in the chat, or you guys should be able to unmute. I also realized I said I was going to bring a bottle of water, and I did not. So I'm going to run. It took me about 1 minute to run downstairs.
No worries.
Come back. We're asking you to talk a lot, and before we run you off your feet, I want to grab a bottle of water.
Okay.
So I'm going to be out for the next minute. I'm going to ask my excellent students to jump in, raise hands, unmute. If it doesn't become bedlam, you can just unmute, but you can also raise hand, and we can have a kind of cue that comes up here. There's a lot that I am really interested about here. I love that we already are seeing connections. This is only the second in the series of events, but already from Nathan's presentation last week, he had also reminded us when he talked about fields of the importance of guides and interpreters within California state parks and what a large employer they are. And so we're going into a little bit of the nuts and bolts for those of you who might be interested, and Teri can tell us more about that. She also told me to pull up this page for you all. This is calcareers.ca.gov. So you can check this out. But I want to, again, I want to open the floor and I want you guys, I know a lot of you have questions, things that you'd like to hear more about. I know some of my former students have gone on to work in California state parks. And I've had really terrific experiences with that. We also had a really strong relationship with Manzanar.
Oh, yeah.
With Sherston Lyon, who has since headed up to Oregon, Southern Oregon. So Sherston left our department, but that was about 5 years ago. But before she left, she would take a yearly trip to Manzanar, the National Historic Site. And maybe we'll revive that. I hope we do. But we sent volunteers there. And I just learned that some of the students who would go with Professor Lyon have continued to go as a yearly ritual, in a sense, as a kind of pilgrimage, where they go and they do volunteer service work. They undercover things like koi ponds that that detainees had made there. This is the Japanese Americans of Japanese descent were detained, obviously, in World War II, as you guys all know, and Manzanar was a major site of that. So that's another regional site. There is a question here: are the seasonal jobs? This is a very specific question from Vidal. Are the seasonal jobs union or only full-time positions? Is one question. And then Matt asks: you started up north before coming to Southern California. How often is relocation required? So there are two questions. Okay. And then please jump in with more. And Pamela, if you want, you can also keep an eye on any questions that come in and help Teri see them. But I will be right back with a little refreshment. Did you want a juice or soda?
Water's fine, thank you.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the union question first. The California state parks and most California employees are covered by a union of some kind. The union that covers state park interpreters. There's also, I should mention, fish and wildlife interpreters, which they get paid a little bit more because they're covered by a different union, different bargaining unit of the union. Theirs is a science bargaining unit. And for some reason, state park interpreters, and that includes the seasonal positions in state parks, got covered in bargaining unit 1 of SEIU 1000, which covers like 100,000 state employees. Supervisors like me were excluded employees, so we're not covered by the union, but the state usually gives the same raises to state parks excluded employees that they give to the union employees. So like a guide, an interpreter 1, a park aide, a park interpretive specialist, those are seasonal jobs. They're all covered by the SEIU 1000. Maintenance is under because there are maintenance aides, but you're not doing interpretation in that. Maintenance aides are covered under another union. But yes, unions are very strong, thank you, in California state parks and in most California employment. And then there was the question, what was the other question?
You started up north before coming to.
You're never required to relocate. Well, I won't say never, because there can be a rare case when, like, if they were to close a park, they would try and employ everyone. They would be required to employ everyone elsewhere. And that might be like, your choice might be, well, you can be employed at the same pay rate, or you can, if you relocate, or you can stay here and not be accommodated. So I won't say never, but that's kind of belongs to other job classifications, some of the corrections employees and things like that. For interpreters, you're never required to relocate. However, I will tell you, if it's a promotion and if your home base that you're leaving and your home base that you're hired at are more than 50 miles apart, the union requires that it's a paid move. So, you know, both of my moves from Sacramento to the Bay Area and from the Bay Area down here were promotions, and obviously more than 50 miles apart. So my moving expenses were covered. If you are a seasonal going to a permanent position, or if you're just coming into parks in a permanent position, you're not going to get be able to have a paid move. But But back to your original question, relocation is never required. I always jokingly tell people it's not the Army. You're not being sent someplace. You get to choose the place you're going to and apply for that job. And then depending on whether you're the best candidate or not, you can get offered the job and move. So, yeah, but yeah, it's not required. Although we joke that there was a recruiting poster for state parks years ago that said, you'll be paid in sunsets. And that's great. And I lived on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay for 10 years, and it was awesome. I could look out from my house and see UC Berkeley and the Bay Bridge and the Richmond Bridge. And, you know, it was awesome. And so I was kind of paid in sunsets, but we also jokingly say sunsets don't pay. My landlord doesn't take sunsets for rent. So, you know, but the pay is decent. It's a union position. It's a state position. So, you know, once you get past the seasonal bump where seasonals sadly don't make very much money, but you know, those of us who've been around for a while are always trying to pressure the unions to kind of get on that. But yeah,
in my line of work, and we actually do have the same employer actually, but
yes,
in my line of work, there is a tendency among, I guess if we're using union language, management, to push toward more adjunct faculty.
right.
As opposed to tenure line faculty. And I wonder if there's something similar, but also, and rather than be take things in too cynical a direction, do you have advice in terms of people who are potentially interested or already know that they're definitely interested either way? Should they test the waters as seasonal employees? Should they try to vault into permanent Guide 1 positions? And are there some, you know, clues that you would give that maybe you wish you'd known or that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, certainly. I would always advise to be to start with seasonal work. And it's not a requirement, but the advantage of it is because in interpretation, it's a very impacted field. There are a lot more applicants than jobs. Which is not to be discouraging, you know, I always tell people, keep working at it. I love to bring new talent along, you know, most of my position was vacant for like 2 years. So one of the first things I've been doing is hiring new interpreters, permanent interpreters. And most of them are on the younger end of the scale. And not that there's not great interpreters that start at 40 like I did, but you know, you're investing in talent so that, you know, it is, you can't do like the instant hire. You're not going to get instantly hired. As a seasonal, you may get hired instantly. You may start out as like a seasonal working in the kiosk and not doing a whole lot of interpretation. I always say though, everybody that works in parks is an interpreter because we've all had that person that walks up to the kiosk and goes, oh, is there a program today? And, oh, well, yes. Well, oh, and what's that tree we saw when we were driving? So everybody's an interpreter. Maintenance folks are interpreters. Park aides are interpreters. Rangers who are law enforcement are interpreters. In fact, they even get a unit on interpretation in their training. So it's important across the job classifications, but yeah, you know, when you start as a seasonal, people are watching you. People in the position to hire are watching you, and we talk. Trust me, we talk about, oh yeah, just see, yeah, he's really good. Oh, I'd like to give him more opportunities. And sometimes we build those opportunities. You know, we can kind of rewrite a duty statement to let this person grow their talents. So, you know, and I've got a park aide or a senior park aide at Silverwood, who we're kind of rewriting his duty statement until he can get hired as a permanent, you know.
That's another really nice parallel with what we heard last week. And that is the not very improvisatory, but being ready to be flexible, to make adjustments, but also as Nathan and now Teri saying, to carve out your own space, especially when you have allies within within the chain of command and among your colleagues. That carving out your own space idea is really important. It's a little bit related to Jeremy Lopez's question. What would you say employers of any of the positions that you personally had the privilege of working at typically look for? Is it expected to be like any blue collar job?
Well, I think one of the things that I look for, and especially if I'm watching a parkade, are they willing to like step up? Yeah, in my career as an interpreter, because of hiring freezes or because we just didn't have enough people, I've cleaned bathrooms. No one else on maintenance was on that day. Bathrooms needed to be cleaned. I have helped cut up a tree that we had to go down in a storm. So if you're the kind of person that's like, oh yeah, I'll step up, I'll help with that, we're gonna see that and we're gonna note that. If you're the kind of person that's like, I mean, if you have limitations that prevent you from doing something, certainly that's different, we understand. But if you're just kind of like shirking your duties and not being a team player, because state parks, are as well known as it is and as big as it is really personnel wise a very tiny department. We have about 3,000, maybe 3,500 employees statewide. That's teeny when you compare it to like EDD or DMV. So we depend on volunteers, we depend on seasonals, we depend on each other, and you really have to have a sense of flexibility. I was laughing because when I started at Sutter's Fort, we had a docent lead, and a docent's a type of volunteer that's trained to do more historic interpretation or science interpretation. Like volunteers, this is why docents are, a smaller class. And his favorite motto was Semper Gumby, which means if you've ever known Gumby and Pokey, they were, okay, Google it. They were made of clay and they're very flexible. So it's kind of funky Latin for always be flexible, always be like Gumby. And I picked that up and used that, and I just found out it's made its way to the governor's Office of Emergency Services. So, so that motto will get you through a lot. Just be flexible, because headquarters, the people all the way up at the top that don't get out to the field a whole lot are going to go, well, now we're doing this, and you just all look at each other and you go, we're gonna Semper Gumby our way through this, So yeah, willingness to be flexible, but be in it for the long haul, because sometimes it can take a while to get hired, because like I said, there's more people than there are positions. So yeah.
That other note you just said about being ready to be flexible, but also to meet needs. That's another key thing that comes up in a lot of these. We do a series also for future history teachers at the 7 to 12 level. And the theme that comes up again and again is to make yourself indispensable by being ready to do anything, whether, and for school teachers, that often means coaching or advising student clubs, and doing those kind of things. It is often above and beyond what you're expected to do. And there are, speaking of unions, there are these kind of issues where you think, well, okay, this is what I should be doing or how I should be doing. But once you're aware of those sort of guidelines, I think that willingness to do additional tasks, to do the sort of things that are going to make you indispensable, I think that's another recurring theme.
Yeah, and there is the last line of every single duty statement in state parks, and probably in a lot of other state hiring, says, because it's always like, you're going to be doing this percentage of this task and this percentage of this task, and the last one is 5% other duties as assigned. That's like, no one's here to clean the bathroom, can you please go clean the bathroom, and things like that. So we all, when we get called to do that, we look at each other and just go, other duties as assigned. Yep. Yeah. Operational needs. Yep.
Absolutely. We have two more questions here. And then I do want to also, if anybody wants to raise your hand, online, and we'll keep up with your questions in the chat. Mason says, are there state park jobs for bachelor degrees? And I think certainly it's not, master's is not required, right?
Interpreters, you have to have a four-year degree. It does not have to be a master's degree. In fact, the vast majority of interpreters don't have master's degrees. A few do, but most of us don't. So yeah, it used to be a free-for-all. If you had a bachelor's in any field, you could apply as an interpreter. Now they're kind of cracking down, but the one thing you've got to understand when you're writing your application is that I'm not the person who screens the applications. I wish I was. Our admin chief and the office tech screens them. So you got to learn to write in terms of what we're doing. So like I tell her specifically if someone has, because they have natural and social sciences, and interpretation or park and recreation, communication studies, and there's a few others they say, or closely related. Well, my degree's in theater. What do we do in theater? We communicate. So that's closely related. And I will tell our admin person who's doing the screening, I consider a theater degree, a communications degree. I consider a teaching credential, a teaching degree, if they have a degree. I consider that social science or, but I'm very careful because it's not always what we call a subject matter expert that is doing the screening. Sometimes, but not usually.
That brings up another question, and back to this sort of theme of what might be helpful for students to hear. What makes an outstanding applicant? Now, you mentioned coming across the desk of others who may not be expert in the particular site or in history more generally,
Right.
That may have to be filtered through. I'm sure somebody in admin would see GPA, a writing ability, a few things,
Mm-hmm.
but at different stages of the application process, how would you reverse engineer
Okay.
the perfect job applicant?
Yeah. I would think now, and a really good way to look at this is how I've been telling lately teachers who want to apply for interpretation jobs, how they can kind of tailor their application. And the nice thing about the Cal Careers site is you can build templates that you can tailor when you apply for a job or apply for an exam. But I would say read the duty statement and figure out how your experience, this is kind of the nuts and bolts side of it, how your experience matches those duties in the duty statement. For instance, if you are a fourth grade teacher, someone may see, and I've seen this happen a couple times recently, where it's like, well, they're not doing interpretive programs. So I'm telling teachers, write your duty or write your application to say, I presented interpretive programs to fourth graders 5 days a week for 6 hours a day. The person who's reading that will see interpretive programs, what I look for in an applicant that is, I really want them to be able to know what a theme is. This is particular to interpretation. Know what thematic interpretation is, so that you've got a topic. It's like when you're writing a paper and you have your theme sentence that you make all your points to relate to that. You're doing an interpretive presentation. It's an article maybe, or a paper, but that's interpretation. So I want to see that you have an understanding of thematic interpretation. I want to see that you have, a lot of times our interpreters are volunteer coordinators as well for that park. I'm not so keen that you've been a volunteer coordinator, but have you worked with people? Have you managed people? Even if it's just like, I had two recreation aides in the program that I ran, the after school program that I ran. I had two folks that I had to coordinate. I had some volunteers that I had to coordinate. So just make sure that you're addressing things in the way it is worded in your duty statement. Keywords are great. But I like to see a sense of curiosity. I always say that interpreters are just very large children, and my district superintendent understands this, and that's why when she walks in my office, she doesn't laugh at all the toys strewn around the room. They're nicely arranged. They're not strewn, but they are toys. And so if you've got a sense of curiosity, if you've got a sense of wanting to share that curiosity with others, that's going to go a long way to showing me that you're going to be interested in writing content for programming, whether it's junior rangers, whether it's an exhibit, whether it's social media, because usually the interpreters end up being the social media managers for their park. I'm not sure how that works, but it does. So again, we're the message makers, you know. I always tell all of our various divisions in our district that, hey, if you've got a message you want out, talk to the interpreters in your park. Talk to me, talk to the interpreters in your park. So you got to be willing to communicate. Got to be, like I said, have a little bit of a sense of adventure. And also know that it's not all fun stuff. It's not all, hey, I'm doing a campfire program. You know, there's paperwork, there's desk work, because we're a bureaucracy. You know, we're the state, we're a bureaucracy. You're going to have sometimes at your desk when you're like, wow, I wish I could be out there talking to people, but no. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I know that. And again, sharing the same employer.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
There's plenty of that. I'm interested a little bit in, a little later in your perception and interactions possibly with other states and sort of California as a particular situation, also a relationship with the national park. But I want to put that on ice and maybe come back to it if we have time, because we got a couple more questions here. Vidal says very specific question. Do you work again once the seasonal work comes back, or do you have to reapply?
Sometimes, yes, the answer is yes, it depends. Sometimes some seasonals, they can make that 189 days because of how they work it. They can make it last year round. Some have to reapply every year, but usually what they will do is if you're a known commodity, even if they're doing interviews, you're not going to have to go through all the background checks and everything. You're still on the books. That's the thing. If you work for state parks, if you work for, we call it the 4 C's, cash collections, meaning museum collections, cars, or kids, you have to be background checked. So if you're at the kiosk, you're background checked because you're handling cash all day and you're also probably driving a parks vehicle. So there, the background check is essential. But yeah, usually they will ask people back and then they will like, okay, well, we needed 10, we got 5 back. We've got 2 that stayed on through the winter or the summer or whatever, because some parks have their high season in the winter, some parks have their high season in the summer, or, any variation of that. And then they will go, okay, so we need to hire 2, 3, 4 more, and then they will do new hires. But a lot of times, most parks will try and bring back people that they know that did a good job the season before. So it's
okay. So there seems to be some latitude at the hiring level, at the site and the supervisor.
Yeah,
level.
and you may have to go through the formality of an interview again, but they're kind of going to go, oh, okay, they reapplied, great, bring them in, But like I said, some people distribute their hours so that they are working year round. You don't have to have your 2 months off. It just depends on how you use your 189 days. So
Excellent. And amazingly, we're at 6:20 and we are going to wrap it at 6:30. Although if there are a few more questions, we can take a little time, but I don't want to keep
I'm cool.
There are a couple questions here. Jeremy's asking about flexibility. Jean is asking about social disruptors. First, Jean says, can you give an example of how interpreters are social disruptors?
Sure. Okay, I'm gonna tell. I'll make it brief. I am a huge Loki fan, both historical Loki and MCU Loki. And Tom Hiddleston is like the biggest Loki fan. And he talks about how Loki was kind of a creative disruptor. He'd sit down at the end of the table with the other gods, and they'd go, well, how are we gonna solve this problem? And he'd like, why don't we try this? And they go, no, that won't. Well, maybe. And there's been, because we work with law enforcement, we work with maintenance folks, we work with admin folks that have more structure sometimes. So interpreters, being the overgrown children that we are and kind of having a creative bent a lot of the times, we're the ones that will go, hey, you know, we might could try and kind of bring that other aspect. And the Rangers always go, no, that won't, you know, that might work, you know. And so that's what I mean by creative disruptors. I mentioned that at an interpreters meeting a few months back in October, and everyone went, yeah, that's us. So yeah, it doesn't mean so much that we're, well, some of us are weird, but it just means that we might have a different take on things that kind of forces everyone else to think outside their comfort level sometimes.
That's excellent. Thanks, Teri. I've got a couple more questions. Jeremy is asking about flexibility, Jeremy Lopez. Depending on the position regarding this line of work, it's my understanding that we're to be as adaptable as we are for going in our duties. But what concerns me is the job position, whatever it may be, will they be willing to be flexible with the applicant? An example would be my current situation as a son taking care of his family, responsibilities of taking care of their needs. Can I rely on these types of jobs to be able to provide for them with a flexible schedule? Are we going to encounter some flexibility in these applications?
Yeah, but we always try, and I always try to be as flexible as possible as a manager. There are some limits, like I generally need my interpreters to be working weekends for the most part. I have a K-12 access coordinator that works Monday through Friday, but it's kind of a given that you're going to be working weekends in this field because that's when people come to parks. School groups come during the week, but you'll get a lot of the casual visitor, the camper, they're there for the weekends. So the way, and I have one interpreter who he is, he has a need to attend church on Sunday morning. So he starts at noon and works till 8 p.m. So, we were able to work that out. So any state office has some flexibility within reason. If you've got to take care of a child, the nice thing is state parks has a lot of benefit programs like FMLA and things like that. If you're caring for a sick family member, we do encourage hiring for people who have special needs, disabilities, and we'll work to accommodate that. But like if you're just gonna go into an interview as an interpreter one that has to do campfire programs every weekend, and you're gonna say, well, I can't work Saturday and Sunday, you're probably not going to be in the running, quite honestly, because we really need you to be able to work Saturday and Sunday in that position. So there is flexibility. I know, and again, it depends. Some supervisors are going to be more hardline than others, just like in any other field of work. But yeah, we try to accommodate when we can, as long as we can work together to. We have a phrase in state parks, and it's probably in all state hiring: covering operational needs. That's right up there with 5% of your duty statement being other duties as assigned. So as long as operational needs are covered, that's what supervisors are looking at. Well, if you do have that family member you have to care for, do we still have park coverage? And I have been known to go, okay, that's great. You want to go to that event, or you need to do this. Let's work together to see how we're going to cover operational needs, so that's kind of the determining factor.
Thanks. And again, that sort of latitude seems to be at the local, at the site level. Daniela asked, she's interested in how hands-on you are with historic sites. And then Morgan asked, park rangers or law enforcement
Yeah.
What the social structure of a state park is generally like regarding interpreters and park rangers. Programs done in languages other than English. So we got 3 questions.
Okay.
Daniela, how hands-on are you with historic sites?
With interpreter 1s and interpreter 2s and guide 1s are very, very, very hands-on. I was in historic sites, you know, you're doing tours, you're doing, depending on, some sites have a cultural resource, well, all districts have a cultural resource manager. Sometimes it's the interpreter 3, it is here, and which I like that was my background. So, but you are very hands-on because you're giving tours, you are probably doing, like at the state capitol and at Hearst Castle, they do Padlet and story, what's it called? It's part of ArcGIS and it's a virtual program where it's a story of one of the people that's involved with the site historically. They do those at Hearst Castle where they talk about the various folks. So yeah, it is very hands-on. You are the frontliners, interpreter 1s, interpreter 2s, guide 1s, park aides and park interpretive specialists, senior park aides. Those are our seasonal positions. Guide trainees is another seasonal position. Those are all very hands-on. Like I said, you're the front line, you're the face of parks. So yeah.
And I actually thank you, Teri. And I think in this next one here, I think I get a sense of sort of workplace, sort of a sitcom situation where the interpreters and the park ranger. How are things in terms of workers dynamics? That's Morgan asking about park rangers and interpreters, guides.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a really brief background. In national parks and some regional parks and some other state parks, you have interpretive rangers and you have law enforcement rangers, but they're all rangers. We used to have that here in state parks, and sometime in the, I think it was the early 80s, late 70s, some of the law enforcement rangers got a little miffed that if you are going to call yourself a ranger, you should wear a badge and a gun. And so the classification of interpreter was put in place. So generally, like I said, our rangers here in state parks, they are law enforcement. Parks is trying, several years ago they did, you may have heard of the transformation plan, and it has been implemented. It's slow. One of the things that was part of that plan, because it used to be that all our district superintendents, our division superintendents came out of the ranger ranks because they had to supervise other rangers, and supposedly the only one that can supervise a ranger is another ranger, which limited some really capable people in the admin ranks, the interp ranks. So they took a look through the rule book and they found out that doesn't really say that. Doesn't say that a ranger only can supervise a ranger. So they're working to bring more different classifications into the superintendent field. Sometimes they're called sector managers instead of sector superintendents. But in fact, we have one, he's a park and rec specialist, is his job classification. He is the sector manager, but he's not law enforcement, but he manages a sector. Districts are divided into sectors. And so they're trying to make efforts to do that, to get, to get it away from rangers being the only ones that could reach the top ranks. And like there's an interpreter, she's up in the Redwood, there's Redwood National and Redwood State Park are like right side by side, and they work together. They're function as the same park essentially. And she promoted to the deputy district superintendent. So, and she's an interpreter, she's not law enforcement. So there's an effort to see past that, but the dynamic is kind of, and it always has been. And luckily we're getting rangers that are kind of growing away from this too, that the rangers are in charge, you know. And certainly if you have an incident, you want them in charge, that's their expertise, but day-to-day operations, there might be an admin person or an inter person that can handle things just as well.
Sounds both productive and diplomatic.
Yes, exactly. That's a good description, yes.
And a very specific question up from Vidal. I assume gun permit is not required unless you're carrying a gun on a job.
No, and I mean, for 10 years on Angel Island, part of my job was to fire a cannon, historic cannon, which was really cool. No matter how bad your day is, once you fire a cannon, your life is much better. But no, so I needed training, of course, and because of my background coming from historic reenactment, I had a lot of training on various kinds of cannon. And when I was a seasonal at Sutter's Fort, part of our job was to do a cannon firing a day. So I had a lot of experience, but because it's a replica of a historic weapon, I didn't need a gun permit. So if you're doing living history and you're carrying a firearm for that, it's going to be covered by the period, what they call antique firearm laws. So you don't need a gun permit and you don't need a guard card. Our rangers go to, even if they've come from another agency, another law enforcement agency, they have to go through our academy, our ranger academy, because there's just a whole different set of laws that they need to learn. Yep.
That's great. I have one more question from the audience, and then I'd like to talk a little bit more about the application process.
Oh, sure.
Years and or cycle of materials, expectations. But first, a quick specific question from Jean Martinez. Are there programs done in languages other than English?
Oh, yes. When I get someone who, in fact, I just did some interviews last week for a park. And if I get an applicant that says, I'm bilingual, that is awesome, because we will, if we don't have bilingual programs at that specific park, we will have, once we have a bilingual interpreter. And so even though, and that's kind of a running joke, what language do you speak? Oh, you're an interpreter. What language do you speak? Tree, you know, I speak tree, I speak history. Which is why sometimes I define myself as a parks educator, because it's just more clear. But yeah, we've got our ports program, which is our virtual programming, has some bilingual offerings. Like I said, when you get a bilingual park interpreter, boy, you're usually turning them loose and going, yeah, do some stuff, do some bilingual programming, so yeah.
So I want to add that to the list of the reverse engineered applicants.
Oh, yeah.
Having language abilities. You mentioned people skills, curiosity, flexibility, an understanding of thematic interpretation. That's a big one. Experience in some kind of interpretive work, whether it's teaching and so framing that work is what I got from Teri. Framing that work as interpretive work is something that people will be on the lookout for. And it sounds like even making sure to use that word and use the idea of interpretation in your in your application, broadly construed. That may be the leg up. So pay attention, because that's a really good tip from Teri. Having and that may be getting through that admin level, the admin filter, somebody who catches that word interpretive, interpretation, interpretive work, those kind of things. These are all really, really, really helpful, really useful. And so on that note, to kind of wrap up, and we're already a few minutes over, but on that note, you pointed us to calcareers.ca.gov. Now, when you do this, and I'll make sure everybody gets hit with this site, we have already shared it once, and I'll share the rest of the links when I share the video. Are most sites going on a rolling application basis? Is there a seasonal application? Do you need CV, resume? Do some of our students are publishing in our student history journal? Is that a big plus? We mentioned languages and other things. Letters of recommendation, calling ahead, is that a good idea
Oh,
to the
gosh,
site?
yeah.
Saying I spoke with Teri and, or I spoke with, Chief District Interpreter Pope, and this is,
Or
you know,
Teri.
or Teri, and I'm submitting this application. That's something that is a good idea in some lines, but sort of calling ahead.
Yeah.
A little bit more about the application process and sort of
Sure.
reverse engineering that application.
Yeah, well, the first thing you have to do for any permanent position is there are what we call exams or assessments is the trend to call them now. There's two types. There is what we call open continuous file, and then there is the I don't know that they have a term, but I'm going to call it the set period where the exam is open. And I'll give you an example of both. The interpreter position, the interpreter 1, 2, and 3 are open continuous file. So, and if you want to click on the where it says get a state job. Oh, here it is right here. Where you see exam assessment search. When you click on that, right there. You can put in a keyword, you can put in interpreter. I will tell you right now, they are revamping the interpreter exam series because it was having glitches. It would be like, how many years of experience do you have doing this? And you get a drop-down menu, and then you'd have to write a couple paragraphs about your experience, and it was timing out and kicking people out and losing all their ranks. So they're revamping it to be more user-friendly, and it should come back on about the middle of this month sometime. But that's open continuous file that you can take that exam at any point. If you pass, and it's on the computer. It does score you immediately, and then it takes about 2 days to get your ranking, and you have to be in the first 3 ranks, which pretty much now everyone that passes is in the first 3 ranks. You used to have to be reachable, and it was a mess. They're actually fixing things that are making them better, which sometimes in state stuff, they fix them and they're not better. But this is one time that it is. But anyway, you have to, if you pass, you get scored immediately, you get ranked within a couple days. They'll send you a little email that says you are in the first rank with your score of 95%. So if you don't pass, you have to wait 9 months before you can take it again. So I always say, have your resume up there, print out your application template that you made for that. So that you can reference it while you're taking the exam.
Teri, I'm gonna back up just a little bit because you mentioned having so it's to go on here.
Yeah, you want to set up a profile, which
so you
create an account, log in, and it'll walk you through setting up a profile, and then you'll have a part where you can set up as many, well, I don't know if it's limitless, but a good number of templates. Like I had templates for Interp 1, Interp 2.
So I want to just take it. Again, I don't want to take too much time, but I do
Sure.
want to just make sure this part is clear here. I want to, let's see, how can I just want to make sure I'm able to share screen here. There we are. Okay, so share screen. So just to go quickly step by step, you go in here, create an account, log in, create an account so that you can log in here. And I shared the website for everybody, calcareers.ca.gov. And then from there, you would do a search and you would have some kind of, you would upload your CV or your resume.
Not your CV, they will let you upload that, but here's my advice, because not everyone will download your resume. Again, we're a bureaucracy. Take everything that's cool on your resume and put it on that state application. And
and that's just a field entry. That's just
it's a field entry. And once you make an account, it'll say over here on this side, which is not on this page, you'll see down toward the bottom templates, and it'll say create a new template, and you can go in and it walks you through the application. And you can set up as many of those as you need. And then when you're going to apply for an exam, or you're going to apply for a position, it'll say, which template would you like to use? Or do you want to essentially wing it? And it'll plug in your information from the template, and then you can go into the different fields and you can tailor it to whatever you need to match the duty statement.
Sorry, again, going backward. in terms of finding open positions,
Yeah.
that would also be done on this website?
On this website, yeah, and I'll show you how in just a minute. But the other kind of exam, let me finish up with that, and then I'll show you how to look up exams or how to look up positions. The other type of exam is something where it's like, this exam, you can apply for it between these dates. And once that date is, the Curator 1 exam just ended the 28th of February, okay? So we should have a new list pretty soon, if we don't already. And so those, it'll all, and once you have an account here, you can set up for notifications, okay? Again, that left side when you're in your account is everything. And so when you want to search for jobs, if you went into that search box and you typed in interpreter and then hit search, it's also going to come up with all the people who do interpretation for the courts and prison system. See, fish and wildlife interpreters. I don't think we have any state park interpreters right now because the exam is offline and they made sure all the pending interpreter positions were going, you know, but you'll also find seasonal. There's a park aid seasonal down in San Diego, down there at the bottom of the screen. And there's another senior park aid position at Nevada County. And if you click on that, and it'll take you to that page and show you all the information. It'll show you whether you can, you can save the job to your list. You can, your state housing may be required, which means basically that when you live there, you are also keeping track of fires or people coming in or things like that. You can also look at the minimum requirements right there, which for a senior park aid is basically high school education or graduation and $1,000. Oh, senior park aid gets a little more because they had to have been a park aid for a year. So
This is great. And this is, so this is a kind of one-stop shop. You set up your account, you can set up alerts for interpreter positions. Maybe some will not be what you're looking for, but that's the way you can catch them.
And you can those alerts you can set up, and when you take the test, it'll ask you, do you want to be statewide? Do you only want to be certain counties? Do you want to get notifications for XYZ? It'll ask you all kinds of questions, so you can always go in and change those too. So this is really your one-stop shop. But I would say, yeah, I mean, yes, if you upload your CV and a portfolio and stuff, that's great, but it may not every hiring manager downloads that stuff. So make sure everything from your CV or your resume is on your application.
That's a really, really clear thing. I hope everybody caught that. Because if I were there, I had my nice PDF resume that I've worked on. I just want to upload my resume.
Sure.
But it sounds like copy and paste in those key things.
Yeah.
Especially when you get a chance to kind of reverse engineer your own application. Because you can see what's expected.
I was talking to our head environmental scientist a few weeks ago. He had a position where it was a seasonal position. He had 100 applicants. If you think that you got through the screening this was at, the screener said, narrow this down and then I'll, narrow it down even more. But he basically, if someone saw C resume, it went in the round file. You got to stack this high. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, because we talked about, is it okay to reach out? Oh, for goodness sake, yes, that's great. It's kind of like brand recognition. If you sent me an email that says, hey, I'd like more information about that position, and I'm gonna do my best to answer your questions. And then when I see your name on the hiring list or on the interview list, I'm gonna go, oh yeah, she asked really good questions. A couple notes on that. Never, ever have your parent act as your job coach and send the email for you. That is that's a red flag. And I had that happen recently, and I'm just like, yeah, no. yeah, so,
But that's important because I sometimes have to jump up and down with my hair on fire to get you guys to come to office hours and to, not because you don't want to be engaged and be plugged in, but sometimes, and when I was an undergrad, this was the case too. I almost felt like going and asking my faculty questions or going to their office hours was a kind of imposition. So this is maybe because I was a first generation college student, but in these kind of situations going out there, what Teri's saying is really, really important, I think. The fact that, and I don't think you're alone in this, right? That you welcome those inquiries, you welcome those advanced reaching out by potential applicants. It shows a level of interest. It's also, of course, an opportunity for you to model really professional communication. Obviously goes without saying, don't send a sloppy email, don't send something that's a mess, but send a really sharp professional query. That's going to stand out.
Yeah, and it's a great way to go, because when I was hired for Angel Island, I always like to say, because so much of it was living history and that was my background. And I had contacted the sector superintendent and sent him a couple of emails, and it was questions like, well, would we be doing this? Because here's my background in that. So that's a great way to kind of, get your information out in front of the person who's going to be in charge of the hiring. And even though I don't screen, I am in charge of my own hiring. And when he got the packet of applications, he actually called me and said, yours isn't in here. I said, well, it should be because I sent it. And he called Sacramento and made sure my application got in there. So, and I got that job. But yeah, so, brand yourself. It's never an imposition.
I think that's so important.
Never an imposition.
How many people for a position do you think actually do that?
Yeah, well,
Not many, probably, right?
I get, for each position, I get maybe 2 or 3 people that will reach out, and ask me questions. And I've talked to other hiring managers that it's like, and if I give them, like, if it's a park aide that they kind of want to put them through their paces, and they're like, could you talk to the different sector managers to see what they want from that position? And if you don't take it and run with it, you're not going to be in the running. So yeah,
that's a really important thing. Again, a nice connection with what we learned last week. I've already kept you now 15 minutes over, Teri. Jeremy said, throw yourself out there with your heart in your sleeve, with an honest inquiry and interest.
Exactly.
Really
And don't have your mom do it. Yeah, literally got an email from a mom going, I'm acting as my son's career coach. And he was a college graduate. And I was like, yeah. So
yeah, sounds like she wanted to get him out of the house till the summer. But this is, thanks from Jean. Thank you, Teri. Very informative session. I really learned a lot. This is terrific. Thank you, Teri, for stepping in when your 2 colleagues were not able to make it. Renee Slider and also Blythe Wilson were not able to make it, but Teri Pope, Chief District Interpreter for
Inland Empire District.
Inland Empire District of the parks, California State Park. I'm so grateful that you joined us. I really am. I think we're very fortunate to have had this sort of inside scoop here. Thanks from Vidal. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here, and then